Welcome back to the Reidel Law Firm Library and Odyssey channel. A lot of developments this week. It's been rather crazy for international trade practitioners. My office has been quite busy answering questions and from media inquiries to clients and everyone in between. Asking about the new Russian sanctions. Thought I'd do a quick video here just detailing a bit about what those sanctions are, at least at this point, what the future looks like and such. So starting off, the first step is in the sanctions that the United States has put on Russia this week is that the list of sanctioned goods, exports out of the United States has increased. Without getting into a lot of the specifics, basically increased a tremendous amount. Anything that's on what's called the commerce control list, the CCL, now requires a license to send to Russia, which is not a fun process. We do that at Reidel Law Firm if you need it. But frankly, anything that is going to require a license is facing a general denial from the Bureau of Industries and Security, or OFAC, Office of Foreign Asset Controls. So they've increased the amount of goods that require licenses to export to Russia. Also, as part of that is some foreign produced goods, which is goods that are not made in the United States, that have a certain amount of American made product in it, or technology, or some certain percentage of American made, what they call de minimis, a certain level of American processing or parts or technology, a certain amount of American stuff basically inside that product. It will also be subject to these new sanctions. So it's pretty broad. Even if you're not an American, even if you are not dealing with American directly exported from America products, you may be under these sanctions. You may have to deal with them. And what the big key is that your bank and your financial institutions that are financing exports, imports, or things like that, they're going to be the ones that are probably going to catch you or deny you, because they are likely subject to these sanctions, which we'll touch on in a bit here. So that's the first part, big expansion of product prohibitions and export controls on anything going to Russia. Beyond that, there's also new rules on, the prohibitions relating to correspondent or payable through accounts and processing of transactions. What this is any type of, let's start with what a correspondent account is. Correspondent account is an account that a foreign bank has with a U.S. bank, or vice versa, where somebody sending a bank from Bank of America, they're sending it to, say, Spur Bank. If Bank of America and Spur Bank don't have bank accounts with each other, how do they settle wires? How do they settle transfers between each other's banks? And the answer is a correspondent account. That's an account in the middle that will essentially have an account at both of those banks and settle the accounts for any wires, any transfers, any type of financial instruments going between those two banks. So there is now a prohibition on correspondent and payable through accounts and the processing of transactions, which will deal with folks or any entities, people and entities that are now on the foreign financial institutions list, which is basically a block list, where those individuals, those institutions, a lot of them banks, are not allowed to have correspondent accounts. They're not allowed to have payable through accounts. So it's part of blocking those financial institutions from having access to the United States, having access to the U.S. dollar, and it's quite a major sanction. It's going to affect a lot of banks. So that's the first one. The second, aspect of that was the financial institutions that were added to what's called the Annex 1 of Directive 2, rather, which is basically a list of financial institutions who are blocked from having and conducting certain transactions. Now, this list is 25 subsidiaries of Spur Bank. Spur Bank is on this, and 25 of their subsidiaries. This is blocking new debt being issued. I think the date is like March 26th or so, from this year. So March 26th of this year, any new debt or equity issued by Sberbank or their foreign financial institution subsidiaries will not, you as an American or U.S. person are not permitted to partake in those offerings, to buy that debt or equity and be involved in those entities any longer. So that's a big one. Sberbank, obviously being one of the larger banks in Russia, it's not facing full blocking sanctions like a lot of other banks, I think, because a lot of average Russians do use Sberbank, who are not, culpable in what's going on in current events. So the United States didn't want to, at least what I understand, they didn't want to take those sanctions to a level that would hurt average Russians. And you can tell that because they went somewhat with kid gloves, so to speak, on Sberbank. They did not go for a knockout punch. They tried to really limit the financial sanctions and the financial impact to Sberbank and their financial institution subsidiaries, so they're companies that they own. They don't want average Russians and people who get their paychecks through Sberbank, they don't want them to be affected. So very good news there, I guess. It's unfortunate, the whole situation, but that's one of the new sanctions. The third is, let me look here. I love how tiny their print is in some of the the federal regulations these days. The other one is, okay, so this is the list of additional banks that will be banned from having new debt and new equity. Sberbank being one of them. There's a whole host of other banks in Russia: Alfa Bank, Credit Bank of Moscow, the Russian Agricultural Bank, Gazprom. And then so it's some banks and also some oil companies, because Gazprom's an oil. Gazprom Neft is gas. Transneft, that's I think a gas or maybe a transportation company. Rostelecom is the one of the telecoms there in Russia. So all sorts of other companies that are not allowed, that Americans and U.S. persons are not allowed to engage in new equity offerings or new debt offerings. So you're not going to be able to buy stock if it's new stock, or buy a bond from that company issued after March 26th. Then the next item is one of the more comprehensive aspects of the sanctions is 20 subsidiaries and VTB Bank. So VTB Bank and 20 of their subsidiaries, and then also a whole bunch of other banks and their subsidiaries. Bank Otkriti, I'm probably not saying that right. Sovcombank and Novikombank, all of those and their subsidiaries are subject to what's called full blocking sanctions. That means that they are not permitted to engage in financial transactions in the U.S. dollar and with any other U.S. Or U.S. person or any entity or individual subject to U.S. regulations or export regulations. They're not allowed to have any transactions with those persons. And this could mean even, for instance, Société Générale, which is a French bank. They have branches all over the world, quite a lot in Eastern Europe. I believe they have some branches in the United States, but if they don't, let's assume they did. Because they have branches in the United States, they are subject to U.S. banking regulations and U.S. export regulations and financial regulations, which would make them subject to following these sanctions that have passed. So what that would mean is Société Générale would not be allowed to transact at all in any capacity with VTB Bank, Sovcombank, Novikombank, and the other banks and subsidiaries that are listed on that new annex. So that's a major sanction, and that will affect average Russians. If you or any of your family members bank at VTB, any of their subsidiaries or the other banks there, and you deal with U.S. transactions, or you want to send money back and forth from the West or the United States to Russia through those banks, that will not happen soon. Those transactions will be stopped. So you should and need to find additional bank accounts. You need to find alternate banking arrangements. Absolutely, that's a critical piece right now. So next is the blocking and sanctions of the financial elite, essentially, or families close to Putin, as it's termed. And there's a list of I don't know, about 12, maybe 15 individuals and companies that are supposedly close to Russian President Putin, and I guess they are assuming that they've done transactions on his behalf and such, but they're being sanctioned, which means they will not be permitted to transact in the U.S. dollar or transact with any U.S. person in all of their assets. And if they have any assets in the United States, those will likely be frozen and inaccessible until this sanction is dropped. Additionally, some 49 or 50 military end users in Russia, which is going to be like agencies that are either within the military or adjacent or affiliated with the military. They now have very strict export controls, which means any type of military or dual use technology. So think about anything from missiles to microchips to aviation and navigation type machinery or equipment. Those companies will no longer be able to export products from the U.S. and receive them. Important for exporters in the United States is to keep your entity list and sanctions list up to date, because if you start shipping products to any of those individuals or organizations or entities on the entity list and the sanctions list, you will get caught eventually, and you will pay a huge, hefty fine. And in some small businesses, it's been the case that those fines have put them out of business because it was so devastating to their business and their cash flow and whatnot. So don't do it. If you're sending anything to Russian, call a trade attorney. Call your whoever's helping you with export, whether it's a customs broker or the company that you're buying from or selling to. Figure out what the sanctions how they may impact you, if they're relevant or not, if they're applicable, and have your paperwork in order. Absolutely. It's critical for anyone doing business in Russia right now. So let's see. Next item was the implementation of export controls on sensitive technologies that support Russia's defense, aerospace, maritime. That's still related to the end users and also the expansion of the export controls. I think what we're getting to there is that there are certain categories of the CCL, the Commerce Control List, which now require a license 100%. Now, what's interesting about that is, and I was actually just quoted in Commerçant, the kind of the Russian equivalent to the Wall Street Journal. They were asking about iPhones and Macs and Windows and whatnot, if that was going to be blocked. And the answer is no once you go down the list of sanctions and exceptions to the licensing requirements. But the way you get the analysis to get there is basically those computer products, those items are sanctioned. They do require now a license to export from the United States. But there are certain exceptions to that licensing requirement, and in particular, one of those exceptions is for what's called consumer communications devices, CCD, which luckily will allow Russians, and businesses to continue to use and purchase iPhones and Macintosh computers and use Windows and all sorts of other consumer electronics. So that was pretty interesting. It's been a very busy week. a lot of folks calling and asking questions, and the stuff's moving so fast that sometimes it's like you sleep at night and things change, right? And then lastly, just rounding it out, is of course part of the sanctions is that an additional 24 Belarusian individuals and entities have been added to the sanctions list, to the entity list. And a couple of them, I think, are banks, and the rest are individuals in the government. If I don't if I recall correctly, if I'm not mistaken. And of course, yeah, that's yeah, that is what it is. Just adding additional people who are sanctioned and cannot do business with U.S. persons or entities. So a lot of crazy stuff going on. It's I'm sure, supposedly now we're hearing there's going to be new sanctions coming. Additionally, this is just U.S. sanctions, by the way. I'm noting the European Union is talking about their own sanctions package. It will probably track the U.S. sanctions very, very closely. May have some differences there or some variations. There is talk about the UK and the European Union trying to push for Russia to be removed from the SWIFT network. The U.S. supposedly is taking a position that should not happen, as well as Germany. And that would be an extreme sanction. I don't expect that will happen, but if it does, it will immediately impact everyday Russians. And that it would really be a terrible option for anyone to take against Russia, because it will go beyond impacting the regime or impacting the military and whatever agencies or entities are involved with the military conflict. It will take it beyond that, and it will directly impose costs, and it will directly impose hardships on the Russian people. So hopefully that will not happen. It's something we're going to keep an eye on. I don't expect it will happen. It's really a nuclear option in regards to the financial sector and sanctions. So I hope this was informative. Yeah, as you can tell, it's been late. It's been a long week. I'm ready to enjoy the weekend. So I will hopefully get this up soon. And if you have questions, concerns about the sanctions, feel free to give us a call. Or reach out to Reidel Law Firm. We do sanctions and compliance and import and export compliance every day, and we will continue to be doing it. So busy times, but stay safe out there, everybody, and definitely reach out if we can be of assistance.